All right, so we did it. We did one episode of Never Date a Therapist.
I know.
Yeah, pretty exciting. Woo-hoo. And both of us survived the week. So welcome to Never Date a Therapist, episode 2. My name's Garrett.
And my name's Melissa, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist.
And I am not. So we got a fun thing that we're going to talk about today, and I'm actually excited to get your input on this because you are not white, and one of us is.
Yeah.
We want to talk about mixed couple relationships. They're pretty common, obviously more common than they've ever been in the States, but I didn't know. I actually thought, especially I think maybe this is because we're from California or we're living in California, that there were more. But did you know still in the United States, I actually did some research on this, babe.
Woohoo. Let's hear it.
Yeah, don't get too used to this, people, this whole research aspect. But I did not know that only 15% of marriages are still actually registered as mixed race marriages. Did you know that in America? Did you think that would have been more?
No, but I have been wondering how race is categorized because even in some forms that I've noticed, there's only like 4 categories.
For race? Oh, you mean like when you have to fill like a job application?
A job
It
application.
says white, non-Hispanic. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
I think
Native American.
Yeah, I think we're going with the actual, kind of the layman's definition. Kind of the layman's definition of what race is, which would be what we all think of, like white, black, Asian, Hispanic, Native American, pretty much all of the obvious differences. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that because I know we've got our own challenges, and I'm pretty sure every couple out there listening who is a mixed race couple, or not just mixed race, because I think actually this is more important than the race, is the culture, right? Because you've learned living with me, especially having a 2-year-old, just how many differences that we have and how we expect her to be raised, but also how we communicate with each other.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the biggest component, though, is the communication piece, because even when I present, for instance, my own cultural insight as far as like how I think things should be done, it's not necessarily, perhaps wrong or right, but more of the cultural piece.
Right. Yeah. There's no wrong or right here. I mean, these are just big, obviously kind of significant differences between how you and your people expect things to be done. And we'll also get into how family plays a role in especially raising a child, especially a toddler or a baby, because, I've learned a lot just from us raising our 2-year-old daughter and having some of your family with us. I've learned a lot about some of your guys' psycho.
Yeah, and you've enjoyed it so much.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, don't we all? And you've enjoyed my lack of culture, being white, the no holds bars, no rules, every family for themselves. So,
well, but even then, your the culture and your upbringing is also so much different than I would have imagined perhaps a white Caucasian person to have.
Yeah, and you actually talked about this slightly in our first episode, that you did not grow up around many white people.
No.
Yeah, you were in a part of the San Fernando Valley in LA where you were pretty much hanging out with other Hispanics, right?
Yes and no. There was a lot of Armenian, Middle Eastern cultures. But yeah, white just wasn't.
Everyone but white.
I mean, even our neighbors.
I think that's the new LA city slogan. #, everyone but white.
You know what's interesting, though, is I was always curious. I was always curious. I always wanted a friend who was white, or not even, or just a neighbor, like just to kind of get to know them, or actually, and I don't know if this is more of, the kid mentality, because you grow up watching movies, you grow up watching TV shows, where predominantly it's a lot of, well, at least back then, white folk.
Yeah. You were curious because white culture, at least like on a national level, is still, whatever you want to call white culture, we can get into that. But it was still considered the dominant mainstream, and it still is nationally. What's going, the racial and the cultural landscape in California obviously is so different than, say, what people in Michigan, are experiencing culture-wise. So, so I imagine that's where that curiosity actually stemmed from.
Well, sure, and also
and you were seeing white TV shows.
Well, and the pristineness, the pristineness of the white family, at least.
Well, at least one of us did our research on words today.
That's a word.
All right, well, now it is.
The pristineness of the family in the movies and the shows, which is something that I always was craving.
Yeah, and you know what? That's why I think there are a lot of that concept of white privilege and stuff comes from, because what's depicted in like a Seventh Heaven, popular 90s show for those of you fellow millennials out there listening.
Seventh Heaven, oh my gosh. Well, although I would say
Christian white family.
Well, yes, but also whenever I would see Seventh Heaven, I would always think like, man, they're so strict. Like, no way. But also the wholesomeness of it.
Yeah.
Was also something like, oh my gosh, the dad's there and present, and you know who the dad is.
Right, yeah. Yeah, they have their shit together. Like, the mom is not losing her mind, taking her day out on her toddler.
Throwing a shoe,
with a twitch that she pulled from a branch outside. Yeah.
Right.
Or a wooden spatula. Those moms that just take their day out and they'll find the closest thing they can.
You know what was interesting, though, for me is the show Malcolm in the Middle. I feel like
I think that really changed the game as far as showing that not every white family has their shit together.
But outside of the white family, I think I identified a lot with like what was going on with the family. And I wasn't necessarily seeing them like, oh my gosh, they're white, versus more of like the interactions. Like, oh, that's so relatable. I can definitely see that. And it was just so fun to watch.
Right. And obviously that show's hilarious. And I resonated with it, just kind of growing up poor, white, in a small town, we didn't feel privileged, being on food stamps and getting donations from the church and stuff like that. So that show, I think, really does an interesting job of showing a different side of what the whole, token white family was depicted on in shows like Seventh Heaven or, other shows where there just seemed to be, like you said, this pristine. And you growing up as like a Latina girl in, the very, very congested San Fernando Valley, that probably seemed like a whole world apart from you. Whereas I imagine a black kid growing up, it'd be the same thing. I mean, that just seemed like, wow, this is what white families have, for dinner every night. And
well, what? Also, I was striving for that. Not necessarily the white component of it, but that just the lifestyle. And actually, I honestly think that a lot of what I would watch really was a big motivator, because other than that, I would have had nothing to compare it to.
Yeah, the media is huge, TV shows, especially as a kid, and kind of, formulating what your depictions are of whatever, however you want to categorize what you're seeing.
Yeah.
Like now we know, thanks to TV shows, that all sponges are best friends with starfish,
Yeah, okay.
And they go out on adventures with pizza and deliveries. And so I didn't know that until I watched SpongeBob.
Yeah, that was common knowledge.
Oh, we'll see. Maybe in my white bubble growing up, we weren't clearly educated on the social and cultural aspects of underwater sponge life.
Well, you know what? Also, you didn't have that channel.
Oh, Nickelodeon. That's true. We didn't even have cable.
Have
Sometimes we did. Sometimes we had cable, but
that's the thing is you actually went through a lot of things that I had never experienced in my life. And I'm brown. Like yes, you bring things up. Well, of course, obviously I'm brown, but you bring things up and I'm like, oh my gosh, that happened. You went through that. Food stamps. Like I never knew food stamps. I never knew how that worked or EBT. Like I never knew any of that.
Yeah.
And we weren't doing well for ourselves. Like we weren't middle class, upper class, anything like that. I think we were still kind of like lowish income. Both parents worked though.
Yeah.
We weren't. There was a bit of a struggle, but we had food. We had a home.
Yeah, and
we had all the things.
I mean, I grew up with food. We never had to worry about not eating or not. We moved a lot and we stayed with a lot of friends of the family. I mean,
but like you said, like donations for like Christmas gifts or not having enough
not
money
every year,
to...
but that happened a few times. I remember opening boots that were like 10 times my size because it was donated from the church. But I mean, I think the point is that like we are all educated, or not educated, I guess, but we're more exposed to what we think a certain culture of a group of people are based on what we see, based on what we see on TV, based on what we see in the movies. And even when I moved out here, I saw, when I was 20, when I moved to LA, and I stayed with some family and, Santa Clarita, which is like a nice kind of predominantly whiter suburb of LA. And I was like, oh, all these people talk and they look and they dress and they interact with each other in the same way of these like seventh heaven type families. And these, everyone's like, there's no yelling, there's no, everyone's calm. I mean, the kids are having discussions about the economy in the backyard. I mean, that might have just been that, that might have been more of an anomaly, but yeah. So to me, it was a culture shock too. Because there's obviously everything is filtered through race right now, and I think people, I don't think it's doing us a service as a society, because we're categorizing everything in very, very, distinct little compartments where, oh, this must be how every white family lives. This must be how every Latino family lives. This must be how every black family lives, based on what we're seeing in pop culture and media and shows and things like that. And as we know, life is way more nuanced, way more complicated. So yeah, I moved there, culture shock, coming from a small town. I mean, I lived in a town when I was a kid in deep East Texas. I lived in a town of 500 people. That was my elementary grade years, my first through fifth grade years. And there wasn't a lot of privilege in that tiny town of 500 people. Black, white. I think it was mostly white. I think we had like one or two black kids in our school, one Asian kid, certainly no Latinos that I remember. But so there's a small town shock too. And that really, really formulates how you view a family or a society. Whereas you grew up, the opposite, like a massive city, but in a, kind of a Latino bubble.
Well, sure. And even so, I wasn't just living in an area of the valley. Like we were moving also every couple of years to different parts of the valley,
right?
Throughout. So
which each has its own little subculture,
right? I mean, literally, I've lived in every corner of the valley and center of the valley, and every time, no whites. And I don't know if it was just because of, again, our income that we couldn't afford that, or I don't know. Now,
one thing I did find out when I moved is that when you move to a city, again, I can only speak to the ones I've lived in. So, LA, especially being LA is probably what people think of as like maybe one of the biggest melting pots in America as far as the amount of different cultures, and the diversity in LA is massive. But you definitely find out people will move into neighborhoods where their other kinds are, essentially, and I know if you talk to a 2024, university student, they're going to tell you that's not the case, but it really is the case. And so I didn't realize like, oh, this is kind of a white neighborhood. I didn't even know that was a thing. Like you said, like white people were kind of more well off in your understanding of how you were raised.
Right. And not that I was right, but that's what I thought.
That's what you knew. Yeah. Yeah, so it is pretty interesting. And I did some more research. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to quiz you, because I did not know this. And maybe I was naive just because,
What kind of quizzing are we talking about here?
We're going to bring up interrace marriages and the legalities of interracial marriage and how the United States and the individual states have treated interracial marriage.
Okay.
It's pretty interesting because we all know and we all are familiar with segregation, and to me, we learned about that, the civil rights, and how obviously the 60s was a big turning point for civil rights and segregation. But to me, we learned that because segregation primarily is a public space issue. They in segregation, you're publicly separating people on buses. Blacks and whites had to use different fountains. Obviously, they could only go to certain restaurants. So, but what I didn't realize was how that just lack of liberty And that state oversight also crept into the private space because there were actual laws about interracial marrying, which, you know, like I said, when I first went into this, I'm like, am I just naive? I didn't know that that was really a thing. I knew publicly they really enforced the intermixing of race. And I guess it makes sense. If you don't want a black and a white kid studying together, you probably don't want a black and a white woman or a black man and a white woman marrying each other.
Oh, yeah.
You know, well, you know, then that's even before gay marriage was even considered a thing. So, so I'm going to quiz you a little bit, okay? So did you know, hold on, let me see. Did you know that there's a term for this, actually? There's a term for interracial marriage, and I never heard this word. Tell me if you've heard this word. Miscegenation.
Oh, my gosh.
miscegenation. Miscegenation. Did you know that?
I mean, it's like, okay, no, not the shen part.
Yeah, so basically it's a Latin term, kind of like most of English is. It's derived from Latin, and it's derived from, well, genation is like genes, right? So your race or, you know, your kind. And then misseer, M-I-S-C-seer. So instead of sincere, misseer. So those two terms together are miscegenation, and misseer means confused or confounded. So if you really, what it means is confused race. That was the literal definition of the term when these laws were addressed, was miscegenation laws. Again, to define what the actual Latin meant, confused race laws. So when, in other words, when two people of a different race or ethnicity wanted to, you know, partake in matrimony, it was, the Latin definition was literally, these are confused race people.
Okay.
They're confused about their own race.
Yeah.
Is essentially what that term means, miscegenation.
Like you stick with your own kind, and if you're trying to not do that, then you're confused.
Yeah, and it's literally built into the term that if you are to marry someone who is not of your race, it's an act of confusion. Is that wild? And this is not ancient. I mean, obviously America's not ancient, but this, okay, so I'll quiz you on this. So there were interracial laws. There were laws that prevented interracial marriages in 41 states. 41 states, okay? So now can you guess when the actual federal government, so it actually became a Supreme Court decision to make interracial marriage officially legal? What year?
67?
Damn, you got it.
Really?
How did you looked at my notes?
No, I'm not a cheater.
I know you're a dirter.
Well, I know. I was just thinking about when segregation, but then it also takes time for laws to go into effect. So give a couple years of wiggle room.
Yeah, well, I will say that that's when the actual U.S. Constitution was amended to legalize interracial marriage. But many of the states had individually overturned it as a state law before that. But this is actually wild. So, okay, so it was illegal in 41 states. Guess what? Our home state, well, not your home state, I'm from Arizona, but California, you know, the poster state for progressive ideals, was not one of those states.
Oh, I bet.
It had the laws, and it had the laws until what year? When was interracial marriage actually legally allowed in California?
Okay, so I'm just thinking as it's extending to the West, that'll also take a little bit of time.
Look at you, history buff.
Whatever. 70.
Now remember, it was overturned. It was overturned nationally in 67. So
70.
No.
What?
Come on. It's going to be before 1967.
Oh.
It's going to be before 1967.
Oh, okay. I thought it was like overturned and then it had to start.
Some of the states that did do that, yeah. But California,
oh man,
1948.
Okay.
So literally, as we were watching, you could be watching. You know, I mean, you're talking about the golden era. This is just post World War II, the golden era, or around the golden era of films in Hollywood, where you were watching people of color and things like that, kind of being on screen, but still people could not marry.
Yeah, that's true because even Lucille Ball, right? Lucille Ball was with Ricky Ricardo, and that was the 50s.
And
actually, they started in early 50s, I think, right? No?
I Love Lucy?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was in the 50s, as far as I know.
Right.
Yeah, because TV wasn't even around until late 50s.
Okay, yeah.
So,
That makes sense.
But so that actually brings me to this because this is kind of interesting. So illegal in 41 states. Do you know what state was the first to overturn the ban on interracial marriage?
The ban. One of those Texas Southern.
No, it was the first state to overturn it.
Oh, that they did.
To allow interracial marriage.
So not Texas.
Definitely not Texas.
North Carolina.
Okay, I think you're thinking of a whole wrong section of our country. We're talking about laws where they were finally okay with interraces marrying.
All right, just give me the
I'll
answer
just tell
here
you,
at this
okay?
point.
All right, ding, ding, ding.
Thank you.
Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was the first state to overturn
I was
miscegenation
close-ish.
laws. Texas is close to Pennsylvania.
No, well,
In what
I
way?
started going a little bit more east as far as the Carolinas go.
Yeah, you just, keep finding yourself, keep following the river somehow. You'll get to a state. Okay, so like I said, California was overturned in 1948, and each state had their own law on who whites could marry. This is where it starts to get wilder.
Oh, yeah, because then you'll have your subcategories.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
So in some states...
They thought of everything.
Yeah. In some states, they're very effective. In some states, you can marry certain races, whites, and by you, I mean obviously whites. Whites can marry certain races. In some states, whites could not marry certain races. California actually was one of the harshest as far as who whites were not allowed to marry. Obviously, until it was overturned.
Who were they not allowed to marry?
Blacks or all Asians in California. Whites could not marry blacks or any Asian, whereas some of the states would define, the ethnicity or define the actual nationality a little closer.
Yeah.
So, for example, like I think it was Nevada, it was blacks, Filipinos.
Well, those were also around the times too when they had those encampments for Asians as well, like right before then, right?
Well, that was World War II. That was Japanese internment camps, and that was kind of a different. That was a whole.
That was like what, the 40s?
Yeah. Well, that was during World War II.
Well, that's what I mean. Is like I can see then why they were put also in that category because they were also like unwanted.
But this was implemented way before World War II.
Oh no!
It wasn't even overturned until just after World War II, because we got out of the war. Obviously, the mid to late 40s. So that's when it was overturned. Now, some states, which states had the harshest? And I think you were barking up the right tree earlier.
Arizona.
How dare you? But Arizona was up there. But there are two states out of all of the 41 states who had race marriage bans. There were two states.
New York.
New York is actually one of the states that never had an interracial ban.
Then you know what? I don't know.
So these are the two harshest states.
Okay.
In these two states, it forbade whites from marrying anyone who was not white.
Mm-hmm. Georgia.
Close. See, at least now you're kind of getting...
Well, I'm trying to now really, really think about.
Oh, you're now really, really
history.
thinking. Nice of you to join us.
You're welcome. If not Georgia, what are those very, very strict law states?
So these two states, I'll just tell you because
Please,
I think this whole podcast could be you guessing.
I know.
These two states forbade whites from all non-whites, whereas some states would say yes to this race, no to that race.
Okay.
This state had it was Texas and West Virginia. Texas and West Virginia, in the rules of who you could marry as a white, only other whites. And so again, this doesn't surprise me that because obviously we've come a long, long, long way. And these obviously as America we have things to deal with that other countries don't. We have a mixed race population, but I had no idea it was this recent when the government actually told people who they could and couldn't marry. But again, people hearing this could be like, well, that's because you're a white man and you didn't know. But I don't know. I don't know why, but I assumed that the segregation part of this whole thing, this whole game, was in the public sector, not in the private. But
I knew that.
Yeah, and you know what? Now that I think about it, when you do get married, you are kind of inviting the government into your relationship.
even outside of that, I mean, they weren't allowed to date. And again, which is what I'm saying is if you were caught dating or seeing each other or even touching or looking at the opposite sex, of course,
right
a
to
black
jail.
man.
Right to jail.
You go right to jail.
You go right to jail.
You go right to jail. Or, I mean, the absolute worst things is you get, I mean, assaulted. You could potentially be killed.
Yeah.
If you even dare to look at a black woman.
Well, this is what's wildest.
I mean, white woman.
This is the last bit of this trivia section for you. This is actually what is wild because, like I said, even though it was federally overturned in 1967 and technically interracial bans were discontinued on a national level, what was the last state in their own state constitution to overturn interracial bans on marriage?
The very last state.
The very last state.
And that's because they were like, no.
They're like, nope. You stick with your kind, see? Listen here, see? You stick with your kind.
That's exactly what they said.
That's how they sounded.
Yeah, true.
Except maybe with different accents.
Yeah, with the Monopoly guy hat.
What's his name? Mr. Moneybags?
He has a name?
Yeah, the Monopoly dude. He has a name. It's like Mr. Moneyworth or Mr. Moneybags. Or...
Are you making this up?
No.
I have a feeling you're just BSing right now.
I'm not bullshitting.
It doesn't say anywhere that on the Monopoly. Does it?
No, because he's just the logo. It doesn't say Tony the Tiger's name on Frosted Flakes.
Doesn't it?
Maybe they do. I don't know. I think we're getting off the rails.
Yeah, so.
He has a name. It's like Mr. Moneybags or Moneyworth or something. He's got his little monocle.
State. I don't know. Georgia.
Close. Alabama. Mm-hmm. Alabama was the last state.
Yeah, they had also like the harshest situations going on too.
The Jim Crow laws down there were pretty wild. But this is what blew my mind. What year did interracial ban actually get removed in Alabama?
81.
2000. The year 2000.
No, it didn't.
Yep, swear to God. The year 2000 is when Alabama, officially as a state, voted against their interracial marriage ban. Now, like I said, it was more of a symbolic thing because legally on a federal level, it was legal by that point, right? Because it was 1967. But in the year 2000, it was in still the Alabama Constitution or whatever. I don't know if they have their own, but you know what I mean. Whatever document upholds their state's laws. The year 2000. It was not, and I guess it brought up, it was on the ballot in 1998 and it was voted down. Can you believe that?
So you and I wouldn't have been able to get married in Alabama?
No, we would have because it was federally legalized.
But in Alabama, that would have been...
If you're going by the state law, then no. If you're going by the state law, then no. But the state would not have been able to stop interracial marriage because, like I said, it became a Supreme Court issue.
Yeah.
So isn't that freaking wild? The year 2000, and it was only by 60% votes. 59% of the state voted yes. 41% of the state still voted no to interracial marriage in the year 2000.
We shall not join together, is what they said.
Yep. Mm-hmm. I guess
it's only wild too because we were already born in those years. Mm-hmm. I think maybe to even younger kids as they get older, they might see, 2000.
Maybe it doesn't sound so old to us. I mean, I was born in 87, so I was 13. You know, I was just getting armpit hairs around that time. So, and when this law finally went into effect.
Is that when you started to get hairs at 13?
Sixth grade. I remember to the minute I was on a church camping trip and I was in the porta potty taking number 2 and I felt something in my arm. I'm like, what the hell? I thought like I was out, we were camping. It was like a church trip. So I thought something was stuck on me like a bug. And I'm like, whoa, that's a hair. That's like a solid black hair. Named him Walter.
Ew, Garrett.
I named my first armpit hair Walter.
Good for you.
Yeah. Who knows where Walter is now.
Good for you for having that creativity.
Yeah, well, if you're proud of something, you name it.
Were you looking forward to armpit hair?
No, I mean, of course.
Oh, really? At that age, you were
because you're just starting to, puberty is hitting, and there are other boys were getting armpit hair like 5th grade, and
like the whole fur.
I mean, I don't know if the whole fur. I didn't know any furry 5th graders, but yeah. So I got my first armpit hair. So when I was getting my first armpit hair,
what was his name again? Carlos.
Walter. Yeah.
Why is it Carlos?
Yeah. Well, you're Latino, so you'd name yours Carla.
Natural. Carla.
Or whatever.
My armpit hairs is Carla, Maria.
Maria. So while I found that first armpit hair somewhere in Alabama, someone was signing into law that blacks and whites actually could marry.
That's insane.
How wild is that? Yeah. I had no idea that it was that recent, you know. Like I said, we've come a long way, but it's easy to think who that might have affected at just a short 24 years ago.
Well, also now even kind of bringing it back to, let's just say, couples who have different cultures. Us is when you first met me, you knew that I was of a different race, culture, whatever. Now,
that was pretty clear,
yeah. So as we've been together and as we see each other a little bit more as just like a person, do you still see color? Because that's a big thing is like, oh, do you see color? Do you not see color? I don't see color. You should see culture.
That's a loaded issue. The short answer is yes, very clearly, because, you know, it doesn't take too long to see someone who looks like a different race than me.
No, but like me, for instance, like, are you, when you talk to me, when you have conversations, when you wake up in the morning, the first thing you see, is it my color or my race or whatever it is?
The first thing I see is usually your open mouth when you're snoring.
I don't snore.
I know, just kidding. Yeah, well, okay. This is the way I view it, and this is the way I kind of, you know, encounter with everyone, because I, as a kid, I didn't, like I said, there were no like, oh, the white people hang out in this group, and the, you know, that just didn't happen where I grew up.
Can you answer my question though?
Yes, I'm going to tell you right now. I view everyone as an individual first, no matter where you come from, no matter what you look like, no matter what language you speak.
But you do see, of course, the color of the skin.
Because you cannot discount the cultural, everything that made you who you are. Like I said, is first and foremost who you are as an individually unique person, and then what your culture was. But I definitely prioritize individuality over kind of group categorization. I think that's something that's gone off the rails in society lately, is that everyone's filtering everything through race and through whatever category you might relate to. But so to me, everyone's an individual first, you know, and which is why you can have an infinite amount of variances in whatever group you're associated with. So, but I will say, as I've lived with you longer and as we've had more discussions, arguments, or whatever, your cultural differences than mine have been more amplified, for sure.
And I think that's one of the things I've been thinking about too, is that for me, the cultural component with you, like for instance, when I see you, for the most part, I don't, what comes to mind isn't, oh, he's white or that. It's really only when we don't agree on a theme of something where I'm like, oh, well, it's because we grew up differently. We have different cultures. And then that's only really when that kind of like goes off in my mind.
Well, you don't get gold without fire, right? So there's got to be a burning. There's got to be a burning in order for something to grow. And our burning comes from those arguments. And yeah, and so no, I mean, I guess to kind of go back to the point you were making, like, I don't really, you know, you're Melissa, so all your other things are a distant second, but they're still there. I don't really kind of buy this whole, you know, I don't see color, because first of all, we do have differences. And I don't think the answer is to pretend they don't exist. The answer is to treat everyone equally. I mean, that's the thing, is like, if you treat everyone as who they are as a person, you know, like my cousin Johnny always says, like, everyone gets a chance with me. No matter who you are, where you're from, everyone gets a chance, you know? And so again, this was Martin Luther King's whole thing, you know, is that you're going to be judged by the content of your character, not the color of your skin. And he was right. I mean, and you don't fight hate with more hate or with differences. You fight hate by truly seeing who that person is, respecting where they come from, respecting their culture. And like I always try and say with anything, whether it's a political difference, whatever, is you find your common ground with someone, because we have way more in common than we do different.
You know what's been coming up a lot too is saving culture.
Elaborate.
More of, for instance, as you and I engage in our family and now having a daughter, is, for instance, Spanish. You know, Spanish might unintentionally get lost. My cultural aspect of how I was brought up and the people before me in my family, all the traditions, all those things, unfortunately, will get lost a little bit, even just between this generation and our daughter. And that's actually one thing that kind of does make me a little sad.
Sure.
is that she's going to perhaps lose that. And again, unintentionally, I want to offer all the things that I know about our culture and our traditions, but with just the speed and velocity of how our culture is advancing, sometimes it's just so hard.
Well, I really do think because America's so vast, that each state or each region, or how you can, zoom in or zoom out as much as you want, each city you're in, each county, whatever. But in California, everything's pretty open. So I don't know if, Latino culture is at risk of disappearing, at least not where we are. But what you're saying is just in our family. Because the way we're raising our daughter, because she's, now we're in Northern California, so there's much less Latino influence up here than there was in the Valley. Whereas in the Valley, by far, whites are minorities, in the San Fernando Valley. So she would have, obviously she would be exposed to a lot more of her Latino roots in the Southern California area.
But even as I'm getting to know, and I've been getting to know a lot of people already, even my age, don't know Spanish.
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean is even the people who are around my age group who are having kids are also just not going to be able to provide that Spanish that they didn't themselves get.
I imagine it gets harder because, again, one thing I learned is that we don't, I think American culture, like white American culture, is, we're predicated on embracing every culture of our citizen. Whoever you are as a citizen, our ideal should be embracing that culture. And so I don't know what I know Southern, because I'm spending 5 years in Texas. There's a true Southern culture. In the South, they have a culture. There's a system and a set of ideals and values that a lot of people hold onto and that they share. Whereas out here, let's say in California, it's just too bifurcated. And bifurcated only means two. So it is split in every way possible. So it is hard to find. So I guess that's where, as a family, as an immediate family, and as parents, like we have to figure out what's our own culture. And yeah, I would imagine because you're first generation.
Yeah, I'm
Mexican
first generation. Yeah.
Which means you don't have to go too far back for your Mexican culture to not only be there, but to be the only culture.
Which is why
family.
I know all the traditions and I know all the cultural aspects that I could potentially be offering to her. And it's just such an inner struggle. And I just wonder how many people are actually experiencing that, of like knowing and then delivering, and then also knowing that, as a mother and as a wife or whatever, we're working all day and we can only sometimes offer and do so much for our kids other than taking care of them, spending quality time with them. And then on top of that, introducing and embedding culture.
Right.
When I have a partner who, one, doesn't speak Spanish, other...
¿Qué? Hablo español.
You know what I mean? I can't have a full-on conversation with you in front of her in Spanish.
Right. Because obviously, well, look, you're talking about other families going through this. I mean, this has to be the biggest issue of American first-generation immigrants, or people who are used to a culture, they're used to a way, and then their families come to America. We're all immigrants, obviously. I mean, except just of course, I come from European culture as a European immigrant, and that kind of ended up being the European immigrants ended up kind of creating the Americas we know it as far as culturally speaking, right? Of course, there are many minorities and many, many, many different ethnicities and nationalities that had a hand. But the white culture came from Europe, whereas with you guys coming from Mexico or anyone else, I think that's one of the big things that families really have to figure out is how do we embrace being an American citizen while also holding on to our roots. And it's tough because you came here to escape your roots, right? Every immigrant family, not escape your roots. All right, before I get lambasted, go ahead and reel me in. Not escape your roots, but escape whatever conditions to
a better life.
A better life, yeah. So not escape your roots, but escape some of the strangling aspects of whatever was there.
And what's interesting is that even from my knowledge is, my family members came here, one, because they weren't allowed to go to school, to further their school. So they tried to come here because their family members weren't were like, no, you're not going to college. What are you talking about? And so that's why they came here. Like, no, I'm going to try to. I mean, now, granted, it didn't happen so immediately. Hence, I'm here.
Yeah, and so I mean, what's the solution? I would imagine that it's the family has to do everything in their power to hold on to assimilate into where they are, but also hold on to that culture and pass that on.
Well, I think that what's being said is just Melissa, do better.
Oh, that should be the name of this podcast.
Melissa, just do better.
Melissa, do better.
With
Garrett,
passing on your traditions and your culture and the language. Just do it.
But also, it's on the other token, I think it's fair to say that maybe some people don't want to pass their culture on. I don't know. See, this is one of the things that is a clear distinction as being a white guy, is that I don't know what my immigrant's culture was. I'm Irish on one side, or, we're all mixes in some way, but I'm Russian on my mom's side, or Ukrainian. And so I don't really know anything. I've never been to Ukraine. I don't know what that culture is, except we love alcohol. And I certainly carried on that culture, no doubt.
And that's what kind of makes me sad a little bit for...
That I love alcohol?
Yeah, well, yes. And another one being that I've heard now more and more recently from white people, like, yeah, we don't really have a culture. I don't really know. We don't really know where we come from. And that's such a...
It's not something that's celebrated. And, obviously, we're not having to sit here and feel sorry for the white folk, because that's not what this is about. But I don't... As far as the culture, one thing I always loved, and this is actually why I've always been attracted to Latinas.
Here we go. Let's talk more about how you're attracted.
I'm sorry, you're one of them. Well, no. No, I'm sorry. You're the only one.
Thank you.
The only Latina I've ever been attracted to.
I knew it.
But, there's a cultural richness that I love. I love that your culture celebrate. Now, it drives me crazy in our family, but that you celebrate parties. You celebrate everything. Latinas celebrate everything with music, with dance. And, we had talked about this too, like respect is a big part of your culture. Respect for elders and parents.
Oh my gosh, that drives me bonkers. Mm-hmm. Like just seeing the lack of respect.
Well, it's wild because, the tú versus usted. Literally, respect is built into the language.
Yeah.
You call someone usted who is in a place of respect or deserving respect, right? Whereas you call someone tú who's just a peer or a friend.
Sure.
So respect is so much valued in your culture that it's literally built into the wording.
And that's the whole thing of that phrase is respect is earned. It's not just given. Whereas in my culture, like even it was just embedded. Like, no, what do you mean it's earned? No, you just provide it. You give it, you offer it, but then also you receive it in return.
Well, I think the people I know, because my dad was always, one of these guys like, you're gonna respect me, demand respect. I don't know anyone who I respect who demands respect. Respect is someone that I give, that I respect someone who conducts themselves in a way that is worthy of admiration. I don't respect someone because they demand my respect. And I feel like so many people still don't get that. They're so, insistent upon receiving respect that they're completely missing the whole fact that people respect you by the way you act and by the way you carry yourself and by the way you treat other people and, all these things that make up who you are and your character. So, yeah, it's whenever I hear someone demanding respect, like, you don't gotta like me, but you're gonna respect me. I mean, immediately then it's hard for me to respect that person.
Yeah, but no, I agree with you. It's not more of a but. And just thinking again for my own culture and just upbringing and seeing just families in general, not all the people that I've worked with, it is this understanding,
right? That
like we just kind of get it.
As far as it's instilled.
Yeah, it is super instilled, but also in the way that, for instance, if an aunt were to tell me, "You're gonna respect me," I wouldn't necessarily think, oh, well, you're not deserving of my respect. I would just think like, okay, I mean, yeah, you're right.
Well, as a therapist, I mean, you must, obviously with child development and, child cognition and things like that, like you must see this everywhere with kids and at whatever age when their parents are their parents almost treat them as peers because we can break this down as deep as it'll go. But I think parents are afraid their kids won't like them. And I think parents are desperate for their kids to like them. And in order to like them, they will allow them to run wild. So as a therapist, I mean, that has to be a big part of what you see.
It's hard because there's just so many variables. Like one is, the parents are probably busy working to bring in money, and so there's less time. And
No,
so the
give me
kids
someone to blame. Can I please make someone
and
the enemy here?
that's the hard thing about the blaming part is it just comes down to a routine, a schedule, and communication.
Damn it, now we're going to have to change the name of this podcast to Do Better, Garrett. I thought it was Keep Being Great, but now it's Do Better.
No, it's a hard thing, and parents, and I get it now, too. It's one thing to preach it, and it's another thing to really go through it, and parents.
I was the best parent on the planet until I became one. Until I became a parent. Yeah. Until I realized how freaking hard it is to balance all these things of like your life, your autonomy, who you are as an adult, who you are as a couple, and what your toddler needs. And we only have one. Mm-hmm. I grew up the eldest of 4, 2 years apart.
Yeah, I can't even imagine having 2, 3, 4. No, it just boggles my mind.
Yeah, parents are, people are having kids older now, so I think there's more wisdom, but also there's less physical energy than if you're 35 and you have a kid as opposed to being 17 or 18. Because in my small town, you start having kids quickly. You start having kids young. And
it's hard too for moms who are stay-at-home moms. That has its own challenges. And also it's hard for moms who are trying to be working moms and then also trying to be an at-home mom after work, right?
Yeah,
balancing everything. I think that's been the biggest issue that has come up are working parents.
Issue that's come up
just in general as far as the field. Struggle. The struggle as moms are now more in the working field. The childcare not being an option, so having to rely on.
And if it is an option, it's a second mortgage.
Yeah, it's expensive or relying on family members. And then there's conflicting things there because with other family relatives, there's other expectations. There's culture.
Yeah, like you guys are convinced that your toddlers will die if they're not wearing socks.
No, but they will get really, really sick. Okay. And then perhaps eventually.
Okay. Doesn't that happen to all of us? No, that's one thing.
Well, no, if you're not wearing socks.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'll make sure I take that back to my...
So everybody, you all have to wear socks.
I hope everyone's wearing socks right now, or you could be dying at this very moment.
Well, that's, of course...
No, but that's a perfect example of something I had no idea of. And, obviously I'm in the medical field, my day job, and it's...
And you prove these medical... backed up science information to...
I couldn't find any peer-reviewed literature on socks, unfortunately. I did search. I searched the NIH, the National Institute of Health. No peer-reviewed articles on the dangers of sockless children and their life expectancy.
Oh, you didn't find the article that it said, hey, unless, if they don't wear socks, they'll get sick.
Granted, I didn't pay the subscription.
Oh, so they need an undershirt and a T-shirt.
Yeah.
So you need 2 layers, plus the sweater.
Uh-huh. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, well then how does anyone survive in a snowy environment? If in California...
Well, you don't go outside.
That's true. Yeah.
That's how you solve that.
But that's wild. And that's something that, also with family and having, some of your family help us with our little one, it's something that I'm,
You don't go outside without a sweater because you will get sick.
It's a sweater.
It's a sweater. Yeah, you need your sweater.
Yeah. It's wild. Well, if you want to go play basketball on a playground in July, make sure you have that sweater, Unless you're one of those fur children you talked about that just got body hair in 5th grade. Then you get some natural immunity to the cold.
The summer's usually fine. There aren't that many restrictions in the summer. Yeah. Other than be careful with the sun.
Well, that's true. I'd mentioned this before, and I'll say it here because it was hilarious. So when I first visited Mexico and first visited your family, and this is just south of the border. This is along the coast, so basically a stone's throw from San Diego. Yeah. And we went to the beach, and this was July or August, something like that.
This wasn't that long ago. This was last year.
This was very recently.
Yeah.
And I remember this is the first time like going to the beach with you and your family. And of course, it was a touristy area. And so there was a lot of people around, and it was summer. And I looked at the beach, and it was just as crowded as like an LA or a San Diego beach. But I couldn't put my finger on what was the difference. I'm like, why does this look different? Like, it looks the same at first glance. Everyone's having fun. Everyone's running around. Everyone's got their music and their boom boxes playing. And then I'm like, oh yeah, that's what it is. Everyone's clothed to the gills.
At the beach.
At the beach. People are wearing, it's the middle of summer. People are wearing hoodies, sweaters, long jeans, and maybe they'll be
oversized T-shirts and shorts.
Yeah. And I'm like, that's it. I'm not used to seeing American beaches where everyone's
And you
clothed.
go into the water like that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's so wild. But again, skin issues or skin whatever, you have a different relationship with the sun than someone like me who turns red if you shine a light on me.
Well, there's also not just the sun. There's also other things, like if you go with, most of the time you go with your family to the beach. And so you're also not going to be wearing this two-piece in front of your uncle.
Well, there's modesty.
In front of, yeah, modesty is such a big thing.
Different, yeah.
Where it's almost kind of ties in with respect, right? Like, yeah. And it's something that's just embedded because it's not even something that was ever talked about. Like, you're not going to wear a two-piece. You're not going to wear. It's just something that was kind of like unspoken.
But I would imagine Latino families who grew up not quite so, I don't know if insulated is the right word, but who grew up more amongst just kind of mainstream culture probably didn't share that same like modesty standards or modesty regulations. I mean, because with me growing up in the church, whatever color you were, like if we would have like church, high school, or not high school, but like youth group trips where there'd be swimming involved, they were no bikinis allowed. If we went on a church trip with our youth group and we'd stay at a hotel in Phoenix or something, and there'd be a hotel pool, the girls, the teenagers, were not allowed to wear two pieces. So I think that ties into more of a religious and more of a something morals that are guiding modesty as opposed to just all now granted you're the Latino here, so don't let me white-splain you. So
yeah, no, it's definitely a different vibe with,
for sure,
with like if I were to go to
that's America's tagline. Welcome to America, a different vibe.
A different vibe, yeah. Even here, if I were to go to the beach with my family, I'm not going to wear max a one-piece.
But I'm telling you, though, I think we're better for it. The struggles that me and you go through as far as trying to understand why on God's earth do you guys, does your culture kind of feel this way about certain things that don't make sense to me? And you obviously probably feeling the exact opposite, but from your end, like how this is so clear. But I think we're better for it. Mm-hmm. I know we are, because it's taught us, because we all like to have this perception of ourselves, especially in modern society where we are well cultured and look how open I am with other cultures. And it's very easy, especially I've noticed for like white people who grow up and are only around other white people. And I've had conversations with a lot of other white people who are very, very outspoken about how white people are evil, and how there's this white equals evil thing. Yeah, the horns. But those people all are ensconced in the whitest culture possible. All their friends are white. It's white as a 1930s Disney movie. It's white, and so there's really like. The ones who are most outspoken about that kind of stuff, are the ones who really don't have a lot of actual daily exposure to a culture that's not their own. Because you do have to adapt, and you do have to, like anything that becomes beautiful, the struggle has to be there. You really do have to work through that stuff.
Yeah.
If you want to consider yourself culturally, educated, culturally competent, exactly right. You have to go through it. You have to experience other cultures,
Yeah. And even so, cultural competence is so hard because even let's say if I come across someone who's Mexican, we might also just have different ways of doing things. And
yeah. Well, again, every family, every individual is still going to have,
Yeah.
I mean, it's really hard to find the line of where exactly does culture end or change from one family to the next.
Well, it's a whole spectrum.
Sure.
That you just can't really pinpoint.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a beautiful experiment, what we're doing, in this country. We're in this big society where we have all these cultures, all these ethnicities, all these groups, all these nationalities, and we're trying to figure out how to do it together. And, we're never going to be perfect at it. But we're better for it. The struggle, the racial issues, as you can look at it from a society, a grand societal landscape, or you can look at it just from the immediacy of your own family. Mm-hmm. I think as a society, we're better for the cultural struggles that we go through. And I think as a family, just talking with me and you, we're better as a family because of the cultural struggles that we go through. Mm-hmm. And because I've learned to adapt and know kind of what you expect. So again, I'm becoming more culturally competent just by the exposure.
Mm-hmm. But also what was needed was I had to continuously communicate with you.
Right.
Versus, let's just say a couple is experiencing the same things, and then the person from a certain culture is really frustrated. Like, why can't you understand that this notion is so important for my family or for our family?
Right.
But then you would have to, one, be validating, another, really try to understand where I'm coming from, and then implement.
Exactly.
Right. So you need certain things to be checked off in order for us to really move forward and get along and be, and have a great relationship.
Yeah. And the nice thing is that
because you could have also easily said, Melissa, you know what? Tamales, pan dulce, all this other crap. Gone. No. We're not going to have that. First of all that shit's unhealthy for you.
First of all, no one said that who's actually had tamales and pan dulce.
Because, I'm just saying.
No, it's good. And now our Christmas is we compromise. Our holidays, we compromise. And, now they're not just like what I grew up, turkey and stuffing and mashed potatoes. Now it's turkey and pozole. And now it's turkey and, tamales. And like I said, it's richer.
And your prime ribs.
And, well, just one prime rib.
Oh, what? Is that not a thing?
Yeah, I think if you're buying multiple prime ribs, you better be feeding a group.
Oh, I guess I don't remember.
We'll get into the education of butchering and meat soon, but
yeah, that's not my forte.
Yeah, well, okay. Yeah. I think
you learned a lot as far as the importance of socks when you're walking around barefoot. So to recap, don't walk around barefoot.
Article, people. Go find that socks.
Don't walk around barefoot because you will get sick.
That's
hilarious.
You can't
leave the house without a sweater if it's kind of chilly outside, and don't leave your house if you've just taken a shower, because you will get sick.
Okay. Well, you heard it here, ladies and gentlemen. Follow these rules or you'll die.
Oh my goodness. No. But that is something that, and I love my grandma. I love every person in my family, but that's how they were raised.
Yeah, I understand.
With these. And, also just thinking about it, it served them for, pneumonia was something that they didn't really know about. And I know that my grandma lost, for instance, a baby.
Right.
And they thought it was because they opened the door and then a gust of wind. And so the baby died.
Yeah. Well, and let me see if I can get one of the physicians that I work with who can come in and maybe give a medical expert.
I was just saying that I can see the value in why.
Sure.
In why they thought these things were accurate.
Oh, of course. I mean, you have to go by what you were taught, and you have to go by what you've seen, and that's how
it's helped for survival too.
Sure.
At some point, I'm sure, which is why these things came to be.
Yeah. Well, also, you guys got margaritas, so any culture with margaritas they're in there for the long run.
I need to look that up where that actually originated.
Margaritas. I don't know, but I'm glad they found their way here.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, nice talking to you.
Likewise.
We'll continue to learn. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.